thank everybody for coming to this STC meeting of the TechSec student chapter. We're really excited to have everyone here. We're excited to be able to be having some meetings in person, be able to invite some speakers in order to be able to really show people what technical communication is and be able to give people some real insights into what it is that the field has to offer, both at an academic and professional level. And today we have our first speaker of 2012, Mr. Jeremy Huston of Grinbath, and I will let him go ahead and introduce what he does there. Thanks.
Mike's probably given me the most difficult task by asking me to tell you what I do. My title is Product Manager of iGuide. You want me to stand up?
Louder, sorry.
Oh, well, this is...
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I'm still recovering, so this is about as loud as I can go. Sorry about that. I'm recovering from illness, so the power of my voice is waning. But as Product Manager of iGuide, I suppose what would make the most sense is if I kind of traced how I got to that point. Because I started as a documentation specialist, and that's where a lot of technical communication majors actually do end up in the professional world. And that's where I ideally wanted to work before I started working towards my PhD. So I am a PhD student, and I'm going to be discussing the bridge between theory and practice. But full disclosure, I'm more keen on theory than I am on practice because I am a PhD student. There's a definite interplay between the two of them, and that can't be denied. And I think that the distance between the two of them is a lot closer than people give it credit for, based on my personal experience alone. But I still lean heavily on theory because of the ability of critical problem-solving skills to be able to address issues that will crop up on a daily basis when you're dealing with things as complicated as communication without human beings. So I started as the documentation specialist for the iGuide eye tracker, and this is it right here. It doesn't look like much, but it's a pretty powerful system for what it can do. And it was my job to become as intimate with this as I possibly could over the summer. So what I did is, in the course of about a month, I played with this and fiddled with this until I figured out all of the ins and outs. I talked with the software engineer and the hardware engineers and discovered everything that I could to understand all the possible questions that could be asked that I needed to address with the documentation. And then after I knew all that information, that's when the first real critical problem arose, because I didn't take Dr. Barker's class, but I've used Dr. Barker's book for software documentation. In the previous software documentation class I've taken, I've had design classes using Dr. Kimball's book, in fact. Information design is the name of that class. So I had all of this information to back up what I needed to do, but what I fundamentally had to decide was what information was important. And that was something that the texts could prepare me for, but it couldn't make the decision for me. That was a critical juncture at my point of employment there, where I had to determine, along with the other documentation specialist at the time, what information needed to go where. And there are two different places, generally speaking, where the information goes. There are three. There's a mystic ephemera of my mind where nobody gets that information unless they ask for it, because it's so specific that nobody would ever really need to know it. The documentation that I produced, the HTML documentation, that was the sort of documentation that was a quick resource for people that were having problems with the hardware and the software. So it had to address concerns immediately, it had to address them clearly, and it had to get to the heart of what the eye tracking unit and software could do. And the interesting thing about the assumptions that I made about the audience was that I was assuming that they were familiar with general fundamentals of eye tracking. And as I've come to find out in different roles, that people think that what is contained in this and the software they think that there are some sort of magical trolls or genies that make this work in ways that it never can function. And part of what my job is now is to dispel that information in an honest and not frustrating way and let them know, no, these are what you can realistically expect out of eye tracking. So I consider that first attempt at the documentation a bit of a failure because I didn't address that aspect of it. But future documentation and support issues, I was able to address that as well. The second place where the information was kept is the support form. And the support form would have more detailed information. So if you're looking for theoretical backgrounds for why we did what, or ways to inform test plans or usability structures, or the basic methodology or best practices, the nitty-gritty information, that's where it was in the support form. And the other documentation specialist that was her focus, was to cover and post that information. But as we both moved into different roles, I kind of swallowed up her job, and it was my job after a while to, as I became more familiarized with the users, I kind of had to go back to the forum and back to the documentation and consistently revise them. And that's one of the things I really like about Grinbath being based in the being an outgrowth of the Texas Tech Usability Lab, is that the fundamental ideology behind it is the recursive nature of usability, is that we're changing things based on user feedback constantly. And if we were in a much more the waterfall design method, then the documentation would have been a complete and utter failure instead of a passing failure, I suppose, in my opinion. But that's the good thing about familiarizing myself with the software and that information is that put me in a position where I could answer all of the support questions that the software engineer could answer. And I could answer all of the support questions that the hardware engineer could answer. And that freed them up to do R&D so that I could field those questions. And that's when I got promoted to product manager, which means the 24-hour support that Grinbath offers as free for every eye tracking unit, that's me. And the 24 hours of forum support that it also offers, that's me. And if anybody has any questions that they email directly to the support@grinbath.com, that comes to me. So I'm the person who gets that information for issues with bugs, problems, or general questions. Some of them, interestingly, are answered in the documentation or on the website, but you can't lead a horse to water, and you can't make a user read the instructions, as we have found out. So my role has evolved from beyond the documentation specialist to overseeing the sales of the eye tracker, promoting the eye tracker, and making sure that there's enough training and support that's done for it. In fact, 2 weeks ago I was at the University of Illinois, and I did an on-site training there. They had just gotten a grant between the marketing department and really, really weird, marketing department and the Family Resiliency Center. And the marketing department, they're teaming together to use eye tracking to try and correlate the way that mothers look at cereal boxes and evaluate the nutritional information, and then correlate that with data about the obesity of children. So it's basically mothers' buying decisions affecting the dietary habits of children, and eye tracking would support where the mothers are looking, describing how they're processing information that's on the cereal boxes. That was a very interesting experience because there were 8 people that I was training there. 3 of them were professors, and they were in and out. 5 of them were graduate students, and 4 of those graduate students had no methodological training whatsoever. So, and that's one of those interesting moments when it's good to have the theory to back up why you're doing what you're doing, because they had no human subjects research background whatsoever, which was very frustrating for me because I'm trying to teach them how to integrate eye tracking research into their human subjects research. I'm trying to teach them how to use hardware and software in their data collection in ways that I'm trying to fundamentally introduce them to the tenets of basic methodologies at the same time, which was very frustrating and eye-opening at the same time. But again, that's one of those moments where what's going to prepare you for that? That's one of those moments where I had to think on my feet because I wasn't going to fly back to Lubbock from Urbana-Champaign at that moment and figure out what I was going to do. It was one of those questions that you have to solve in the moment. And it's one of those problems that comes up over and over at Grinbath where the situation is, I don't care what the problem is, just solve it. Which is very, there's a sense of expediency behind it. But you have to understand how to solve it in the most tactful way, the most ethical way, the most honest way. And that's one of the things that I've tried to work very hard on, is making sure that there are no illusions about what the product can and cannot do. And again, that's one of the great benefits of having a CEO who is based in technical communications, that there's an ethical undercurrent that tends to crop up now and again, that I don't have to make those hard ethical decisions. I can take the proper ethical choice and still keep my job. It doesn't pay very well, but I can still maintain that. But as I was saying, I also do the support and the training now, which is actually which is an interesting outgrowth from the documentation. We knew going into it that people weren't going to read the documentation. Statistically speaking, people do not read the documentation. And we found over and over that they wouldn't, because people would constantly be asking me questions on the support forum and through email. How do I do this? What's the problem here? And they were already addressed. But we found that the solution to that issue we discovered was best addressed by actually training them in how to use the unit. Because, I'm going to be brutally honest, adjusting this LED is a bugger. Getting this to properly light up the eye so that it gets the appropriate calibration and good eye tracking data that you're looking for is not an easy thing to do. There's a severe learning curve with it. And the fantastic thing about it is that if you watch somebody do it, or you just do it yourself, suddenly that learning curve flattens very quickly. But if you try to describe it with writing, we're technical communicators here. We should have had an assignment at one point in our experience where we were supposed to write a recipe, like how to do a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, whether it was in composition or in technical communication. And they're always train wrecks because it's such a physical procedure that makes so much more sense when you actually do it yourself. But writing about it is such a very, very odd abstraction of such an intimate process, really, because you have to move with it and adjust it and touch it. And intimate is the only way I can describe it, especially when you put it on somebody's head and you're working with them and you're at this distance from their face. You've got to overcome some self-confidence and and personal distance issues pretty darn fast if you want to get this to work. And we found that just by giving personalized training, even if it was through Skype, started to solve those issues in a rather expeditious fashion. It was fantastic how fast those issues started to just dissolve as soon as we addressed it directly. So the documentation hasn't gone away. People still find it very useful once they know how to get to it and they realize, oh, it's there. But it's just interesting to see that I am working around the reason I was hired in order to better facilitate the use of the product that I'm selling now. It seems like a kind of a gross irony, but I think that's a communication issue in and of itself, is understanding a problem, identifying the problem, and then being able to find the best solution for that problem in ways that meet the needs of your audience. And I'm proud to say that we're meeting the needs of our audience now. We didn't do it at first. So that is basically what I do. And it's not to say that I do everything in Grinbath, because there are a lot of people who have other jobs and wear a lot of different hats too. But that's essentially what I do. And as a technical communicator, it's my job to make sure that that information meets the people that it's for. One of the recent initiatives that we've gone through is specifically for customers. So, I mean, we're doing webinars that kind of publicize it, but this is, like I said, this is for customers. So it goes through the same steps as the training as much as possible, because the training takes 16 hours. Depending. Sometimes it can take longer, but usually it takes 16 hours over 8 hours over 2 days. But we're addressing some of those concerns by making sure that we capture the issues that come up the most often and then address them in the webinars. The most recent one we had was one where we addressed how to do the lighting as much as possible. And again, it's only so effective when they can't do it as well, but just seeing somebody do it is so much more effective than the videos that we have or the documentary that I've produced. It's those instances where I'm particularly proud to be a technical communicator, and I can specifically emphasize communicator, because I'm not writing, and I'm not just producing instructional material. That is my primary focus. But I'm trying to find ways that help people use a product. And my theoretical background, I wrote my master's thesis focusing on the usability of the website and understanding how the principles of design serve usability. So making sure that people can use something is a primary interest of mine, and a focus in what I do. So that makes me particularly proud, is because I can say to my dad, look, it's not all about writing instructions. It's not all about this. I'm doing different things with communicating. And I have to address these needs that these different people have. And one of the things that I find very helpful as well is the training that I've had in intercultural communication. Because I'm the 24-hour support, and when Adrian in Hong Kong is having a problem with his unit, and Palal in Singapore is having a problem with his unit, I need to be able to mitigate between, they can have the same problem, but I need to answer them in two completely different ways. I need to understand how communication works for them, and a cursory understanding of Huston works, but it needs to be, to make the practice work, the theory has to be deep. And I'm happy to say that both of those people are currently satisfied with their units, and I've been able to help both of those people consistently as they work through their problems. But you can't make any assumptions. You can't make any assumptions, because we have, South Korea, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, Rome, Poland, United States, Canada, Chile. We've got an iGuide on every continent. Antarctica, but I don't know how much research they're going to need to do down there.
Give it time.
But in order to meet the needs of a 24-hour support system, there's a vital necessity for having an understanding of how people communicate. And I'm glad to say that I have that background because of what I've been able to learn. But it's been very satisfying being able to do something with food and being able finally to say, okay, this is why this matters. This is actually real now, because he's, just for instance, Adrian is from Hong Kong, and I believe he's a UK native, but he's living in Hong Kong. And he has a tendency to, and this is just a very small, minor thing, when he agrees with a statement, normally conversationally United States will say, okay, and it's a non-committal answer. It doesn't necessarily mean yes or no, but it's filler. And one of the things I noticed with, and when we say, okay, fine, that tends to be kind of a confrontational statement. That's usually what you say to, I don't know, your mom when she's imposing curfew or something along those lines. I'm like, okay, fine. And when I was speaking with Adrian, he's using that term. He's like, okay, fine. And it's very hard not to respond to that. But understand that, no, this is a cultural communication method that is instinctual to him, and I need to be able to accommodate for that. Because it's not fair for my customer to have to meet me on my level. That's reversed. He's the one paying my paycheck. So I need to meet him on his level. And it's satisfying to be able to do that, to identify what my biases are, and to identify where he's coming from, and say, okay, this is how we'll do this. But that's just one very small, very trite example, actually. But it's an interesting illustration of how things can be different. But the application of those principles of theory really inform a very effective practice. Because if it were not for my ability, I spoke very, very fervently before he actually made that purchase. And if it weren't for my ability to communicate with him, he would not have made that purchase, and we would have been out that year. And as it stands, he's I don't know how much information I dare give about a client, but he's part of a major media outreach corporation in China, working through that area. And it's a good idea to make sure that people have good impressions of what you do and what your product is. And so I wasn't just selling the eye tracker. I was selling our corporate ethos. And in an effect, I'm selling Texas Tech's ethos. And that actually is more imposing to me, because I want to make sure that I represent the institution. I'm very proud of the program that I'm part of. I'm proud that I'm part of Grinbath, but I'm very, very proud to be part of Texas Tech, because of the good research that has come out of it, because of the strong researchers that are here. So being able to show that I belong here, at least in a little bit, by applying those theoretical methods, makes me happy. Makes me feel a little bit less like an imposter.
Don't worry, you belong.
Thank you.
We accept you, Jeremy.
Well, thank you very much. I could talk more, but I prefer to turn things over to everybody else and see if you have any questions about what I said, or any more clarifications about what I do and how I try to inform my theory, or I try to inform the practice with my theory. Yes, Dr. Kim?
Well, I wondered if you could comment a little bit more about what you see about the relationship between technical communication and technical training. What is the spectrum of relationships between sitting down with somebody individually, either mediated or not mediated, and creating some sort of system that you send out into the world to run itself, like a manual or a website or something like that people have to come to, as if by proxy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is.
What do you see as the dynamic of difference to, or what do you see as the connection?
Wow. I think there's a fantastic amount of difference between, for example, one of the things that we recently did is we added a tutorial slideshow to the installer, which runs itself after you install the software. And that goes through a walkthrough that there's an expected sort of interaction with the system. Then there's the documentation, which is very static. The user has to come to that. Then there's the mediated, as you stated, the Skype or webinars. And then there's the interpersonal communication, which is very immediate through the face-to-face. And this is actually a very good question for me to actually chew on, because I'm trying to come up with ideas for an article based on the pedagogy that comes behind the technical training, behind this, and how it may differ from other technical communication approaches. And anyway, back to that spread there. I think when we have the documentation, it manifests a sort of passive ideology that is adopted in technical communication and hasn't moved in. It's not very user-centered. It's not appreciative of the user. And I think it's a standby that is unfortunate. We tried to upgrade it with that tutorial slideshow to make it so that they have a more interactive learning experience, so that what they do is, they learn by doing, basically. And then the other ones where it's more interactive, I think the connection between technical communication and technical training in each of those instances is recognizing how the audience is going to use it and the best way to communicate the information. Because as much as I do like that tutorial slideshow, the learning by doing, I don't think it's as effective as it could be, because it's not contextual, it's not very contingent. If an issue comes up during the middle of the learning by doing, the slideshow is immediately become relevant.
Whereas your relationship, your conversation with Adrian was very contingent.
Yes.
Very contextual. It's very placed, even though you were in different places.
Yeah.
Would media richness theory help? You know, the theory that people choose different media, different richnesses for
Yes.
different
Yeah.
capabilities. So for some conversations you have to pick up the phone.
You're right. And yes, I think that informs it. Very powerfully, in fact. Because this is unfortunate, because you've pinpointed a weakness in my theoretical background that I have to admit, because I've read, I think, maybe 4 or 5 articles in media richness theory, and they weren't my favorite, so they're not in the front there.
It tends to be very structural.
Yeah. So it's, now that you bring it back up, I think that's actually very, very important, and it sheds, and like I've been trying to say the whole time, is that the theory is going to inform the way that we conduct the practice, and then depending on the results of the practice, that's going to reflect back on how we need to approach the theory again, and how that's going to change how we look at it. And then the media richness, particularly for this, like I stated before, just being able to, the adjustment of this device is infinite, and being able to choose a richer medium is immediately going to convey more data in a much more personal way, and it's going to be, and the immediacy is also a very, very important factor, because when it's structured, the unfortunate nature of the structured information is that you lose stuff, and your people are going to stop listening. I found this out when I was doing some usability testing on the tutorial slideshow, was that one of the usability testers just clicked through a couple of slides, and I was like, wait, you haven't done the action. You haven't worked through this. It's like, I don't care. I don't want to do this. And with the media richness theory informing that, if we just chose a richer media, we can adjust for that. And if there's a hole in the knowledge, we can come back to it and address it later. But if there's, I don't want to treat users as having attention deficit syndrome, but
But they do.
They do, to be honest.
Also, it kind of occurs to me, there was a fellow named Stephen Pye, who was actually a woodworker, but he wrote this concept of design risk.
Okay.
There are some activities that are more risky than others. Like, for example, if you take a chisel to a piece of wood, that's very risky because you can make a bad stroke. It requires a lot of expertise, requires a lot of practice and fiddling.
Okay.
But if you put that chisel in a block of wood, like a plane,
Right. Yeah.
then almost anybody can use it.
Yeah.
And if you put the chisel on a circular wheel with lots of other little chisels, put that wheel into a saw, a circular saw, then it can almost run by itself. So, from low risk design to high risk design, it seems to me like placing that infrared light is a very high risk moment.
Yes.
It's not very automated. It requires some expertise, a careful touch.
Yes. Yes. And I will emphatically state that it is probably the riskiest element of the design.
That's the point. It sounds like where all of the training kind of comes to a sticking point.
Yeah, and it really does. Is because if you can get the proper lighting with the LED, you've got the calibration and you're set. All you need to do is make sure that they don't start bobbing their head during the test. You've got your data. Interesting, and I like that you bring up the design risk because this was a calculated one actually. A lot of eye trackers, because of the way that they work, they strobe light onto the eye and they rely on foveal reflection. So they have to hit the back of the eye through the pupil and then come back out to be read. And because of that, there are a whole host of things that disqualify users from being able to
Eyeglasses, contact lenses, macular degeneration,
dry eyes, sometimes allergy medication. It's Nielsen, Jakob Nielsen has a very, very long list of conditions that will knock a user out. It's a very interesting questionnaire if you read his methodology in that paper. It's a 125-page document, and he states, okay, this is what we do, and if you check yes on any of these, invite them to leave. And it's like a 30-question sheet. And that LED cuts out about half of those questions.
Yeah.
At least.
So it's less risky in some ways than the alternative technology.
Yeah. And it's also very it's a manifestation of the desperation of usability sometimes. Because sometimes it is very difficult to get a user in. And the last thing that they wanted was to have an eye tracker that you had to throw out half your participants for when you're already having a 50% attrition rate for users who have already agreed to come, even when you pay them. So they wanted to make sure that when they came, they could guarantee that they could get data from.
I wonder if you could kind of draw like a curve between media richness theory and risk, and maybe at the point of greatest risk is where the greatest level of richness of media needs to occur.
It's necessary, yeah.
And then you have to usability test that.
Yeah. That's a fantastic idea.
So I wanted to throw in an industry question
Okay.
here before we run a little bit late. So you're working in a company that primarily employs technical communicators.
Pretty much exclusively, all but one.
Right. So that's
He's interdisciplinary. He's got some TC background.
So everyone in the company has some level of technical communication background.
Yep.
So that's a very different working environment than what the vast majority of technical communicators are going to find themselves working in. It seems that there would be some clear advantage to that. How would it be for you to take your experience now working in a company that is so inclusive of what technical communication is and is so appreciative of it, and move that into a company or an organization even where you would have to communicate that value?
I'm basing this off of some research that I've actually done. My friend is a software engineer, and I've asked him, and we've discussed this. I think it would actually be pretty easy, because when I described to him what I did, some of the things that we take for granted, like being able to communicate information effectively, persuasively, and being able to make it accessible to the customers, or, I mean, even the basic rhetorical stance of being a liaison between the customer and the company, the advocate for the user. That is something that is very desirable in many, many institutions, particularly in software design. I believe the title for that job is project owner, and the basic job is what I'm doing now, is taking information and feedback from the customers, providing them the support that they need, and making sure that I can take that back to, say, the software engineer and say, okay, here's some problems with the system. This is what they said they don't like. Here are the underlying problems, and this is what we need to get fixed. These are the priorities. So if somebody says, I want the graphical user interface to be pink, there's a bug whenever I load a project, and I want this added feature, I can look at those, prioritize them, and make an argument for the one that I think needs to be done, take it to the software engineer, he changes it, and I can bring it back, and I take it to the customer, and then I can sell it back to them. Well, not sell, but, present them with that information back. So even though I am sheltered, I think based on the research that I've done with my friend and looking into the industry that surrounds this sort of expertise, or that values this sort of expertise, I think it would be easy to make that transition. Because these are, and I've talked with Dr. Carter about this as well. One of the things that she notes industry would prefer is the capacity for the critical thought, the ability to make the decisions, the ability to find problems before they become problems and find solutions to them, so that you're not bailing out the boat in the middle of the ocean. And she states over and over again, they don't care if you can use Photoshop with this this expertise or this many years. They don't care if you can do this. These are nice things. The most important fundamental aspects of what technical communicators do and how they serve the institution is being able to insert themselves into positions where they can solve problems. Because we think differently. We're trained to think differently. Now you have some more industry experience than I do, so you can put me to shame. But based on what I've seen and what I've been able to find out for myself, I think it would be easy. I think I can make a pretty good transfer. I think I'll have culture shock, but yeah.
Right. Well, and I phrase it that way, but I don't think it's necessarily specific to you, so much as to all of us in communicating that value and how working within an organization, we make that decision. I think that critical awareness is a nice way of being able to phrase that.
Yeah, because we all have such different skill sets. But the thing that really sets us apart is that, just looking at Grinbath, we have our software engineer who taught himself how to code pretty much. He made the software from the ground up. And then we have, we've taught ourselves these skills. Video production skills. Kate and I both taught ourselves how to do that. Those are skills that you can teach yourself just fine. But those critical thinking, the theoretical background, that's training and understanding that you have to have before you can come into that situation. It's the kind of preparation that you need to make the decisions that you need in a crisis moment when it comes up. Yeah.
Is there any other questions? Thank you very much, Jeremy. Can we get a round for Jeremy?